Tonight, the White House says the US Special Envoy will travel to Gaza tomorrow to inspect aid deliveries. Well, the announcements come in the last hour as part of a plan to speed up aid deliveries as Israel finds itself more isolated, as the UK and others signal they'll recognise Palestine as a state. Well, back here, Keir Starmer is insisting he is listening to British hostages angry about the UK's decision to do so, but he's insisting that he's trying to stop a human catastrophe. Also tonight, nurses warn they could strike later this year unless they get a better pay offer from the government. Plus, the former Labour Minister Annalise Dodds joins the calls for the government to bring in a wealth tax, saying that radical thinking is needed. And we'll be talking about a new digital trend that we spotted right here in Westminster. Stepping towards the summer break with us tonight with Mick Lynch and Henna Davison, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, as Israel finds itself facing mounting diplomatic pressure over evidence of starvation in Gaza, the reaction from the United States, one of its closest allies, is of course crucial. And earlier, Donald Trump threatened Canada after it moved to recognise a Palestinian state, saying that it meant signing a trade deal would be very hard. But in the last few minutes, we've been hearing from the White House, and we're told it disagrees with Canada, France and the UK. They've also confirmed that the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will head to Gaza tomorrow after a productive meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Well, the White House press secretary revealed the news in the last hour. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
President Trump is a humanitarian with a big heart. And that's why he sent Special Envoy Witkoff to the region in an effort to save lives and end this crisis. Tomorrow, Special Envoy Witkoff and Ambassador Huckabee will be traveling into Gaza to inspect the current distribution sites and secure a plan to deliver more food and meet with local Gazans to hear firsthand about this dire situation on the ground. The Special Envoy and the Ambassador will brief the President immediately after their visit to approve a final plan for food and aid distribution into the region.
Well, let's cross straight to Washington. We can speak to Sky's David Blevins. David, how significant do you think this is?
Sophie, I think it would be a difficult thing to exaggerate the significance of the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and the Middle East Ambassador Mike Huckabee travelling into Gaza. I can't think of anyone else close to the administration that has done that in the course of the war. They're going to see for themselves humanitarian efforts there and establish if there is a better approach that can be taken by Donald Trump and his administration here in Washington. Of course, it does come after Donald Trump, during his visit to Scotland, commenting about starvation in the region. He said that was something that couldn't be faked. But given, of course, that he has been critical of countries like France and the UK and Canada for indicating their intention to recognise the state of Palestine, you can see that he is attempting to strike some sort of balance, attempting to be seen as a humanitarian. That was a term used a lot by Caroline Levitt during that press conference. She said he was not just a humanitarian, but a peacemaker, talked about the effort that he'd made to bring peace and end the war between Israel and Iran, for example. And again, she called for the president to be nominated for the Nobel Prize.
And we've also been hearing about the tariffs, haven't we, as well? Just fill us in on what's been happening when it comes to that deadline that's looming too.
Yeah, it's one of those words that just won't go away, isn't it? Tariffs. It seems a very long time ago, back on April 2nd, that the president announced his sweeping tariffs with his show and tell boards in the Rose Garden. He called that Liberation Day, but then, of course, paused because of the meltdown in the markets. That decision wiped nearly $3 trillion off stock in the space of a few days. He then paused again at the beginning of July because of negotiations going on and said said tomorrow, August 1st, would definitely be the deadline. Yet within the last couple of hours, he has extended it by 90 days again, at least for Mexico, because of what he describes as the complexities of the border. Now, to be fair, by my count, they've signed up a number of nations, about 7, I think, to date, at least, to a framework deal, including the UK at 10% and the EU this week at 15%. But 7 deals is far short of the 90 deals in 90 days they promised. Instead, it appears that most of those 90 countries on the list are simply going to receive a letter instructing them what they have to pay.
Really interesting stuff. Hard to keep up, isn't it? David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch and the broadcaster and former Conservative Minister Deanna Davison. Great to have you both with us on the programme. Mick, what's your take on the latest on Gaza? It feels we've got these different nations taking different approaches. America being in, I guess, a divergence from some of the other countries, such as the UK and France and Canada.
Well, I think it's good that Keir Starmer has said that Britain will recognise Palestine. I don't quite understand why he's taken such a convoluted route to do it, because it's my belief and many people's belief that Palestine should be recognised as a sovereign country as a principle. The Palestinian people deserve that. The United Nations believes that as well. 147 countries have signed up to that. So I think it's a big statement that they will have their sovereignty recognised by Britain, but I don't understand these conditions. He's set a set of conditions that Israel will never comply with, which will mean, superficially, from what I'm reading, and everyone else is reading, that he will have to recognise them. So if he knows that's going to happen, I think he should get on with it and make it a certainty.
Deanna, what's your take on it all?
Well, it strikes me that this seems to be, regrettably, an example of Starmer perhaps being overcautious and kind of being persuaded, cajoled by his own backbenchers to actually take action. I think there is quite a bit of frustration from a lot of his backbenchers that it's actually taken him this long to act on something. And it's not the first example where he's either changed his mind or been dragged kicking and screaming to take the action that his own party would want to see. And I think that's really disappointing and says an awful lot about the state of one's own leadership.
It's interesting to see what's happening in the United States as well, with this decision for Steve Witkoff to go to Gaza. But then we've also, of course, heard Donald Trump criticising countries that have decided to take this route towards recognising Palestine as a state. How important do you think what Donald Trump does is?
Well, it's very important, but he's an erratic person on all fronts. Every issue, he seems to flip-flop from one position to another. And I suppose out of that, you'll get some way forward. And I don't know if people are influencing him to take a sensible approach. But Israel must be put under pressure to allow the aid to be in there and then to move to a situation where there's no war, there's no violence, there's no more slaughter of people. And we need to get to a position where the Gaza Strip and the West Bank can be rebuilt and the Palestinian people and the Israelis can live in peace. At the moment, we're headed into further catastrophe, I think, if Netanyahu doesn't pull away from his position. Now, he's coming under a lot of pressure from a lot of governments, and I'm hoping that Trump will line up with every other government for a sensible solution.
What would you say to people on perhaps the other side who were saying that, look, Keir Starmer should be putting conditions on Hamas as well, saying that, hostages need to be released and that there's a risk of this rewarding Hamas?
Well, I think it's a given that hostages must be released. Everybody sensible believes in that and everybody wants that to happen. All the things need to happen at the same time, but one of the building blocks to that is to say to the Palestinian people, we recognise your cause, you've got a case, you deserve to have a sovereign nation, you deserve to live in peace. And making that declaration is something that the government can do. I think this nonsense today about the Montevideo Convention is just a diversion that's come up from people that want to support Israel. I think he needs to be bold. And I do agree with Deanna that he shows very poor leadership. He doesn't get to what is an obvious conclusion. I think it's inevitable now. Even Tories in the Parliament are standing up, exclaiming that they want him to change his position and he's got to put more pressure on Israel. Now, that needs a coalition of people from around the world who say, Israel, you've got to behave yourself, you've got to stop the slaughter. The
Conservative position is, I guess, a bit more nuanced than that, isn't it, as well? Kemi Badenoch has said that actually, there is a risk of rewarding Hamas here. What do you make of that?
I think, I'm agreeing with Mick to some extent here, which doesn't happen particularly often. that I think if conditions are to be placed on one side, they have to be placed on both sides, and that does mean the release of the hostages. You know, I do think this is a debate, regrettably, that sometimes gets incredibly inflamed and people are incredibly passionate about. But actually, the kind of ultimate goal for both sides is a long-term solution to peace here.
But the children of Gaza don't hold the hostages. There are children dying of starvation. There are women and men, the elderly, are being killed trying to get to this limited food aid. That must be resolved as an urgent step. And that's what people should be concentrating on. But recognising Palestine is a step forward to a solution. But we need convoys going through those gates freely.
Yeah, it's for the food, as you say, that I think most people can unite around. Thanks both very much indeed. Well, back here, the Prime Minister said earlier that he particularly listens to hostages after the British-Israeli hostage, Emily Damari, criticised him. Keir Starmer said that there is a need to do everything we can to alleviate the human catastrophe in Gaza. So where does this leave the Prime Minister's relationship within his own party? Well, we can speak now to the former chair of Labour Friends of Israel, that's Dame Louise Ellman. Thank you very much for being with us. So I'm just interested, firstly, in your kind of broad reaction to this week's events. Do you support the push by the UK government towards Palestinian statehood?
Well, I certainly agree that there should be a Palestinian state alongside Israel. But this way of trying to promote it, I think, simply isn't going to help, and it's certainly not going to help in the current situation. And it's making a statement in the way that it's been framed. It would be quite possible that a putative Palestinian state with no borders, with no government, could be recognised while the hostages were still languishing in those terrible tunnels. And that can't be the right place to be.
I mean, the Labour manifesto said we are committed to recognising a Palestinian state. So some would say that this is, what Labour should just do straight away anyway.
Well, having a Palestinian state involves a significant process. It has to be accepted it's a Palestinian state alongside Israel, living in peace, not a Palestinian state instead of Israel. It has to have a government that can function to run a proper society representing Palestinians. And that means it can't be Hamas, who are dedicated to destroying Israel and be running a tyranny and have brought absolute horror on the Palestinian people in Gaza. It has to be organised properly, and it has to be negotiated in a proper way. So just making a statement doesn't do that. And my concern at the moment is the way in which that statement has been framed doesn't make any conditions very clear. And it leaves a situation where the hostages could still be there in those tunnels and a Palestinian state without any borders declared. It's no incentive at all for Hamas to try to come to an agreement, or for the Palestinians as a whole to form an alternative government working with the Arab states so that a Palestinian state could really work.
What would you say to those who say that this is also a way of, I guess, using what little leverage we have on Israel? Because you can see, I think, across the world that many of Israel's allies are losing patience with the Netanyahu government, including the British government. They're worried about children starving. They're worried about people getting killed trying to get food or aid. And by saying that unless Israel changes what it's doing, then the UK government will recognise Palestine as a state, it is a way of using that leverage.
I don't think this will work at all. There certainly should be a Palestinian state alongside Israel, but we have to remember Israel is a country in absolute trauma. On October the 7th, 2013, over 1,000 Israelis were massacred in their homes. There was organised, brutal mass rapes conducted in several different sites in Israel. Hostages were taken. Many of those hostages are still there in those terror tunnels. So that's a horrendous situation, and that leaves a great mark on the population who suffered it. So that has to be remembered. But it is important that there is a proper discussion, a proper negotiation, and that there is a Palestinian state. But making a statement like this without conditions, and specifically without having conditions that hostages should be released, I don't think is an incentive for Hamas to do the right thing. After all, if Hamas did give up those hostages now, that war could be ended instantly. I don't think this statement gives any incentive for that at all.
I'm interested in your view of, I guess, Keir Starmer a bit more widely and where the Labour government is at, because you, of course, resigned from the Labour Party in 2019 over allegations of anti-Semitism, and then you rejoined when you saw that you believed that Keir Starmer was tackling the issue. Do you think that there is a risk that he, could be losing trust among Jewish Labour members?
Well, Keir Starmer has tackled anti-Semitism, and the Labour Party now is a very different place from the Labour Party I resigned from back in 2019. It's been transformed. But there is a big concern at the moment on exactly what is going to happen. Yes, there's great support for a Palestinian state alongside Israel, but what does this statement mean? Where does it leave the hostages? That's of great concern, not just to the Jewish community, but to many other people as well.
I'm Louise Almond. Thank you very much indeed. Good to have you on the programme today and get your perspective. Let's have a quick chat, shall we, with Mick and Deanna again. What did you make of what Louise Almond was saying?
Really powerful, and I'd actually forgotten about her resignation at the time. So, really reassuring to hear that she feels that in the Labour Party, anti-Semitism has been, to some extent, tackled. I think what it really does is just highlight the kind of real desire to find a solution to this. For those who perhaps consider themselves pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian, or consider themselves neither, to find that long-term solution. But also it's not simple. And I think sometimes in this debate, we do kind of oversimplify a little bit without necessarily, as Louise outlined there, talking through, well, what are the steps that need to be taken in order to actively resolve this? Be that recognising Palestine as a state and the actual steps that need to be taken to get there, or to ensuring that aid is able to get there on the ground, ensuring the hostages are released. These aren't platitudes, they're really, really important things that have to be done. And we sometimes get a bit bogged down, I think, in the top lines and not actually in the detail of what that needs to look like.
Yeah, but the people who are not looking for a solution are the Israeli government. Netanyahu does not want a solution to this conflict and this slaughter that is being carried out on the Palestinian people, because if he pulls away from the war, his government will collapse. He may face prosecution as a result of that once he stopped being the Prime Minister. So he has shown no sign, and in fact he's broken ceasefires, he's relaunched his campaign. They're now demolishing all of Gaza. It's been turned into a camp, essentially, where people are being slaughtered. So you have to get to the first principles. The people must be fed. The war on the Palestinians must stop, and then we can get on to the structures. They've done everything they can to undermine the Palestinian Authority. They've been not recognising their territory in the West Bank. There are hundreds of people being murdered by Israel and by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. This government in Israel is out of control, and it's not responding to its so-called partners. We're allies of this government, and they've killed 60,000 people over the last 20 months or so. I don't know how we can say we're allies of a government that is got unlawful occupation of the West Bank, is killing people there, and is killing people en masse through mechanised slaughter in Gaza. So that's got to change. But the first principles have got to be they need to stop killing people and they need to be fed.
But what do you make, Mick, of the point that Dame Louise said there, that if the hostages were released, the war would stop overnight?
Well, I don't think it would. There's no sign that the Israeli government would stop the war. They've had a process where the hostages were being returned, and they broke the ceasefire back earlier this year. There was a steady ceasefire, aid was coming in, and the situation was getting to some version of stability. Netanyahu decided to break that ceasefire. I think he will carry on the war for as long as he can and until the Americans stop him.
OK. There's an awful lot more to be said on this subject, as always, but thank you both very much for your contributions to it, Mick and Deanna there. Well, of course, the situation in Gaza is sure to feature in tomorrow's papers as well. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be Conservative Home's Deputy Editor Henry Hill and the New Statesman's Associate Political Editor Rachel Cunliffe. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up. Could nurses be next to go on strike? Their union says it will ballot its members on industrial action unless the government agrees to increase pay.
Turkey is burying its dead.
Whole families died in this collapse. Generations wiped out. I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
Anyone could say, I'll do that, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
Sky News. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. Now, there could be more strikes on the horizon because the Royal College of Nursing has signalled its members could walk out in England, Wales and Northern Ireland unless they get a better pay offer. It comes after union members rejected a 3.6% pay increase for next year in England, saying nurses feel deeply undervalued. But the Westminster government says it can't move any further on pay. Right, let's find out what's going on. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here to tell us more. What's happening?
Not just nurses. The combative Wes Streeting, who this week told the BMA it would lose a war with the government, is facing the potential of strike action on 4 fronts. 4 in the National Health Service. So today, the Royal College of Nursing, number 1, has warned that its members are feeling deeply undervalued and that they're going to ballot on industrial action. 91% of their members say that the government's offer of award of 3.6% is not enough. They're claiming there are widespread vacancies, years of pay erosion and thwarted career progression. Turnout 56%, 170,000 nursing staff voted. Apparently that's the highest ever. And the General Secretary, that is Professor Nicola Ranger, has said this: "My profession feels deeply undervalued, and that's why record numbers are telling the government to wake up, sense the urgency here and do what's right by them and by patients." Threat number 2, of course, is the resident doctors we already know about. They've just completed 5 days of strikes, and Wes Streeting is getting even more voluble, I suppose is the word you might use. I love that, this letter. "Thank you for your letter of the 29th of July, inviting me to get back to the negotiating table," which is ironic because I never left, he said. And he said the BMA will lose the war with the government. Your action's self-defeating. You've squandered the considerable goodwill you had with me of this government. Number 3 threat, GPs. They have warned Stephen Kinnock, the health minister, that the government must act on its list of demands to avoid a future dispute. Now, this is about... they're going to hold a meeting in September to decide whether to ballot for strike action. This is concerns about the new neighbourhood hubs that are proposed for GPs. Number 4 is Unison. They represent ambulance staff and porters. They're consulting on members on possible action in response to their 3.6% pay award. Winter of chaos and potential strikes in the NHS.
Blimey. Well, we've got to go to Mick Lynch, haven't we? Mick, what do you make of it all?
Well, it's a bit of a mess. I think the government had an opportunity last year, or leading into this year's pay talks. I think they should have sought a long-term deal, possibly over the life of the government. We offered talks on that on the railway. Instead, they've chosen for year-by-year deals, and you're going to keep getting these issues arising because you keep doing short-term deals. And I think they should have looked at how to structure pay, look at grading, look at conditions, which the doctors are talking about as well. And that would have helped them get through the whole term of office.
Is there an argument that, look, the financial situation at the minute is so volatile with what's happening with the global economy, with Trump, you know... That
but the financials of working people are volatile as well. The cost of living crisis has not gone away. It's just abated a bit, but the costs are still up. Housing in every town in Britain is astronomical. People are leaving university with astronomical debts. Doctors are being told they may not have a job going forward. So the NHS has been left in a complete crisis. And what you need is a plan to get us through that and get us through this term of office. Now, I want Labour to have a successful period of government. And one of the key issues to that is getting public sector workers sorted out. Let's not forget they had 14 years of austerity. No percent and 1% pay impositions from a previous regime has caused them to be very resentful about where their pay is. So that needs good negotiations and a long-term plan.
Yeah.
I mean, there haven't been 14 years of austerity in public sector pay at all, so I'd refute that from the get-go. I think the thing that I'm finding sort of wryly amusing about the situation now is that when the Conservatives were in government, we got all manner of criticism from the Labour government in how we were handling pay negotiations with public sector workers. And so for me, I'm sort of wryly grinning because I think it's Labour realising that actually being in government is a little bit harder than they might potentially have thought when they were in opposition. So we now found ourselves in exactly the same situation again with potentially more strike action. And, you know, you can talk about strike action as a top-down, but we have to remember what that means for individuals on those waiting lists, waiting for major surgery, operations. There was a horrible example of a man who has kidney cancer, was due to go in the following day to have his kidney removed, and that was cancelled. Potentially may not get an operation for 2 months now, and in his words, that could be a death sentence. That's the reality of what these strikes mean, and it absolutely has to be sorted.
I wonder if West Streeting's rudeness, if you like, or tough talking, is perhaps backfiring slightly. Is he antagonising some of the health unions? Perhaps,
I was on the
perhaps a bit more carrot, a bit less stick.
I was on the end of some of that more recently when Grant Shapps saying we were all going to strike ourselves out of a job and he was going to crush us and replace us with armies of agency labour. Well, he's gone and the issues are still there, the unions are still there, and the unions will carry on. Their members are calling out for their pay issues to be resolved, for their conditions to be sorted out, and for the service to be properly funded. Now, I don't think that's an overnight job. I don't think he can just click his fingers and get a settlement. He's got to work at it, and I think they've taken the wrong choice by not going for longer-term deals.
It's interesting, that point you made. What would you say to... Because you talk to ministers, as John does as well, I'm sure, and some of the departments are getting absolutely squeezed, and they look at West Street and they think he's got a pretty good deal in the NHS compared to some of the cuts they're having to...
But he's got an enormous portfolio. I mean, sorting out the NHS is the work of several terms of government, I think. West Streeting's not going to be able to resolve it all immediately. But it all stems from Rachel Reeves and her fiscal rules and all the rest of it, and not having the right amount of income for the government and not having a plan to invest in our public services properly.
But we're kind of reaching a point where the public finances are in a pickle. I mean, you look at our national...
we need to raise some more money.
I know, but we have very different approaches to this. I mean, debt interest alone now is over £100 billion per year, almost as much as we spend on our entire education budget solely on interest. And so I think talking about pay rise, I think if you ballot anyone, they would say, yes, please give me a higher pay rise. But we need to look at the reality of this. It has to be service improvement over just simply adding in more money and more money and more money, because it's becoming really unsustainable in the long run.
Well, it's sustainable if you raise the right amount of revenue, if you have the right systems in place and you invest in the service to get new technology, to get better outcomes and all of that. Most unions will go along with that. They know that change is permanent in any service or any company, private or public. So it's believing that there's going to be a plan. And I don't think they have displayed to NHS workers or the public that the NHS problems are sorted out on a common plan that everybody can get behind. You need to get the unions on your side, including pay, and that doesn't mean everybody's going to be a millionaire, but you need to get them on their side and work to that plan so that the service improves. Nobody is against service improvement in the trade unions.
I think what's interesting in the last week or so, or last few weeks, is that public opinion is against. It seems to be moving against the junior doctors, resident doctors, as we now call them, because a lot of people say, "Well, hold on, didn't you get a whopping great pay rise last year, and now you're coming back for more?" Previously, NHS staff, particularly nurses, get a lot of public sympathy, but at the moment, the government seems to be banking on the fact that the doctors, in particular, don't have great public support.
Interesting debate, it really has been. And just to say, I should say, the Executive Director of the Royal College of Nursing will be on the UK Tonight with Sarah Jamie at 8 p.m. to explain their decisions, so definitely worth sticking around for that one as well. Now, in recent weeks, questions around whether the Chancellor could introduce a wealth tax in her next budget haven't gone away, and now the former Cabinet Minister, Annalise Dodds, has suggested the Treasury should consider one. She sat down with our political editor, Beth Rigby, for her first long-form interview since stepping down from Labour's front bench.
I do think that it's important we consider who has the broadest shoulders when these issues are considered. There has been, you're right, a lot of discussion going on around, in inverted commas, a wealth tax. I've been a bit sceptical about some of those claims for a long time because, of course, wealth is taxed in the UK. I think what has changed the debate, however, is the work that was undertaken by the Commission on Wealth Tax. They looked at the operation of lots of different wealth tax internationally. They looked at all of that evidence and set out how it would be possible to deliver something like that in a UK context. I would hope that the Treasury is considering that kind of evidence as well as other changes that have been put forward. I mean, we've seen the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, for example, put forward suggestions, as I understand it. Yeah. I think it's important for all of those to be considered now.
I mean, I think if Rachel Reeves was listening to this podcast, she'd absolutely hate what you just said about wealth taxes, and I think she's very opposed.
I have to say I've not spoken directly with her about this. I'm sure, as I mentioned before, she would be right to be sceptical about any claims that any of these would immediately change the fiscal situation of the government. But I think the trade-off we have to consider in a world of lots of difficult trade-offs is potentially making some big and significant changes early, or having to make many tactical changes
through the Parliament.
Exactly, and potentially being forced into some of those difficult decisions anyway later on.
And if you want to listen to a bit more of the full electoral dysfunction episode, you can just scan that QR code that you can see on your screen now. What do you reckon of a wealth tax appeal to you, Diana?
No, absolutely not. I think they're terrible ideas because we end up always talking about raising more money. And I think the bigger issue has to be how do we curb our spending? You know, we're spending beyond our means at the moment as a country. I've already referenced a little bit earlier on the amount we're spending alone out of taxpayers' money on debt interest, over £110 billion a year alone on debt interest, which is staggering sum of money. And that is money that is not being spent on anything tangible. We always talk about raising more money. We need to control our finances. We need to control our spending. That has to be the priority. And also, I just genuinely do not believe wealth taxes work. We see it now with the non-doms tax that's been put in place, where new analysis looks like that's actually going to cost the government more money than it will ever raise.
I get the sense you might disagree.
I disagree. I mean, if we have more austerity, which is what this control of expenditure is, it means people get poorer. It means the economy will run down. We need more investment in this economy. That means the state needs to play a role in some of that. It needs to kickstart investment and it needs to get growth. Now, everyone wants growth, but nobody can find it, it seems to me. But that means that the state must have a tactical role in this economy and an industrial plan that's going to get the growth going. But she cannot continue, Rachel Reeves, with this idea that there's never going to be tax rises on the rich or even on the moderately wealthy. People have to pay the appropriate amount of tax so that we can run society the way we want it to function.
John, it's interesting hearing from Annalise Dodds as well, isn't it? Who was, I guess, formerly, pretty loyal to Keir Starmer and now can, let it all off, say what she thinks.
And she was, when he first became leader, she was his shadow chancellor before Rachel Reeves. It's interesting also, this debate was kicked off by Neil Kinnock here on Sky News.
In the studio with
the first Sunday in July on Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. And he suddenly came out with this, and it's really started a debate. And you've got MPs on the left of the Labour Party, like Richard Bergen and various others, strongly campaigning for this. And I think there's quite a bit of support for it, because a lot of Labour MPs think, well, we've got to raise this money, why not? I think we'll see some taxes on wealthy people, if not a wealth tax. We'll see perhaps income... other MPs have suggested they're putting a penny or two on the top rate of income tax, those sort of things.
Or council tax is another one, isn't it? Is there a particular one that you think would work better than others, or do you just think, we just got to...
Well, I think we need a proper investigation into how to raise tax efficiently so that people are paying the right amount. There are an awful lot of people who hardly pay any tax. There's a lot of bogus self-employment. There's a lot of people who are in a black economy. There are a lot of companies avoiding tax like it's the purpose of the company to not pay tax. So every institution, every company, every individual needs to be taxed appropriately. So that needs thinking through. And there's too much of a piecemeal attitude. But she simply hasn't got enough money to do the things that need to be done, never mind the things that they may want to do as extras.
What do you reckon about the tax debate?
Well, I agree with Mick in that we do tend to take quite a piecemeal approach. I do think we probably need a wider scale review of taxation, not just levels, but the overall structures of taxation. We'd probably come out in quite different places if we carried out those reviews individually. No taxation at all. But ultimately, yeah, we need that wider scale review. Simplification, I think, is really important because, as Mick said, you know, that there are whole industries out there to try and help companies pay less tax. Well, let's simplify the whole thing, take out a lot of that bureaucracy, which, you know, in other nations with more simple tax systems does actually result in more tax being paid. I'm speaking quickly because this is an issue that I'm deeply, deeply passionate about. But I also, but I also think we do get a little bit too het up sometimes on, as I've already said, raising more tax in order to pay for more things. Well, actually, we need a wider review of what are we spending taxpayers' money on and how do we reduce that? Because in the long term, we are setting ourselves up for a disaster if we don't curb our public finances.
Really interesting stuff. Thanks all very much indeed. Now, our next guest is a relentless campaigner who's helped change the law around non-disclosure agreements, so they're known as kind of gagging clauses. Zelda Perkins was an assistant to Harvey Weinstein, who 8 years ago broke her own NDA to expose his predatory behaviour. Well, now the UK government's pledged to ban NDAs that are designed to silence staff who've suffered harassment or discrimination, and I've been speaking to Zelda to get her thoughts. Thank you so much for being on the programme. It's great to meet you. I've obviously followed your work and your campaigning for a while now.
Thank you.
The government said it's going to effectively, ban the use of non-disclosure agreements, NDAs. Well, what's your sort of reaction to this?
Well, for me, it's huge on a personal level and a bigger level. I have been campaigning to end the misuse of NDAs for 7 years since I broke my NDA with Harvey Weinstein. And it's been quite a long journey. And what has been such a surprise with this amendment from the government is that it's so ambitious and they've gone broader and wider and much better than anything I had imagined. And this actually, if this goes through and the intentions that the government have actually come to fruition, this will be, global leading legislation around harassment and discrimination for people in work, which is an extraordinary thing.
NDAs are something that we talk about a lot in the industry, but I guess lots of people might not be really familiar with what they are and the impact that they have, because it's silencing people effectively, right?
Yeah, it's removing a basic human right. It's taking away your voice to be able to talk about generally a very traumatic experience that has happened to you, and the law is being used abusively to do that. So a non-disclosure agreement, I think the problem with the word NDA now is that everybody presumes that an NDA has it written all over it. All non-disclosure agreement, or NDA, means is any clause in any form of agreement, whether that's your employment agreement at the beginning of your employment or whether it's in a settlement agreement when there's been an issue and you're trying to exit. If there is a clause in that agreement that stops you from talking about what has happened to you, that is an NDA. And that includes non-disparagement clauses, because non-disparagement clauses have been far more used recently because of people's awareness of the term NDA. So lawyers have been using non-disparagement clauses very broadly to say you can't talk about anything that's happened at work, you can't say anything bad about your employment, and that has exactly the same action as a specific confidentiality clause.
So you're talking about this legislation potentially going further than you would have kind of dreamed of.
Yeah.
What impact do you think it might have then?
Well, personally, I believe it will have an enormous impact, and I don't think people realise quite how big that impact will be. It's like soft impact, because if you take away the tool that people have been using to hide all sorts of misconduct, it means that individuals are going to have to take responsibility for their own behaviour. They're going to have to modify their own behaviour straight away at root. And most people know when they are behaving badly. And for the people who don't know and are incontinent abusers or really can't control themselves, well, they will be weeded out very quickly now at the start. And there won't be these serial perpetrators who get passed around businesses or passed around departments and have a trail of NDAs behind them which nobody knows about, nobody's allowed to warn other employees about, etc.
Yeah.
So I think it will really make the workplace so much more transparent and safe. And it does, it puts the onus on individuals, which is where it should be. You know, it's difficult for employers to monitor every single employee's behaviour. And, you know, we need to be responsible for our behaviour. We need to take responsibility for how we treat other people. And if you can't hide misconduct, then you're not going to perpetrate.
You see, this is it, isn't it? You know, you're talking there about effectively serial offenders, people that everyone knows about, just moving around or continuing. And I'm not going to name any names, but, you know, you or I could mention a few of them, I'm sure, you know, off the top of our heads, right? You know, there's people who have a reputation, there's people who use the law to try and silence allegations against them. How widespread do you think this is?
I think for me, it's part of the reason that this campaign has been so important to me is because at the beginning, you know, I only was aware of my own experience, you know, and Weinstein obviously was a serial perpetrator, but I wasn't even aware of the enormity of his misconduct. But what came clear to me very, very early on, and actually it was through government consultation, was that confidentiality and the silencing of people is endemic in every sector, every sector.
And you have to be pretty brave to be a whistleblower.
You do. It's no fun. And actually, it really affects your career prospects, speaking up, as right as it is. But then also keeping silent affects your career prospects too, because when you go for a job interview and you can't speak about why you left your last place of employment, you have to lie. And you don't think about those things when you're signing a settlement agreement. You're made to lie, which makes you complicit potentially with a serial abuser. And this has a huge effect on people's, you know, emotional well-being. And also you can't speak to your friends, your partner, your husband, your doctor. And this really does destroy people's mental health and ability to move forward.
I know you have your own sort of story, and I'm going to allow you to talk as much about that or as little about that as you want, because I know it's your campaigning that you've become renowned for and worked for. But kind of looking back to, you know, the girl that you were at the time or the young woman you were at the time, do you think that this change in the law would have helped your position back then?
What's so amazing about this piece of law, if it goes through, is that it would have completely and utterly changed the situation. There could have been no confidentiality clause in our agreement. And the difficulty is, or was then, was that I was not the direct victim. And it wasn't really up to me about how to behave within that negotiation.
You're a witness.
I was a witness, essentially, and because I had worked for Weinstein for a long time, I was a witness of lots of different behaviours, whereas the girl that I was trying to protect had only met Weinstein twice. So it really was her word against his. I wasn't in the room when anything happened, but I could have, you know, been much more powerful in protecting and stopping that situation if this had been in law. The thing for me about our NDA, which I think still shocks people when I say it says that we have to use our best endeavours not to speak to the police, we're not allowed to speak to a therapist, not allowed to speak to a member of our family, not allowed to speak to each other again, not allowed to speak to the HMRC, was that we had counsel on our side. We had really good lawyers. So just having independent legal advice isn't enough. It has to be legislative. So we had, you know, Queen's counsel from a great human rights law firm who didn't say to us, by the way, these clauses actually are unenforceable if you took them to court.
You must have been very brave. It must have been quite frightening to decide to break it.
It was, but you know what? After having spent 20 plus years not being able to speak, nothing could actually have been worse than the experience I'd been through. And I think that, I hope, is illustrative to people of how damaging signing your voice away is. And I think it's very hard for people to understand what that pressure feels like until you experience it yourself. And very sadly, you know, I still have people coming to me. I've had 2 people come to me this week who, you know, are suicidal because of the effects of not being able to talk about what's happened to them. And as fantastic as this legislation is, it's not retrospective. So, you know, for those people, it's still going to be very hard, but I think the environment is very different. And I think they will feel that actually they will be safe to maybe talk to the people they need to, i.e. a doctor or their family, and not live in the same fear that they were living in.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it is, as you say, something that could have an enormous impact on people in the future. And, you know, if we all look at our lives and think about the impact that we want to have on the world, then, you know, I think you've done something really great. So thank you.
Oh, no, I mean, you know, it's also enormous thanks to the government's, you know, ambition with this, because they are really trying to broaden the protections so that it's not just to people with employment contracts. This will cover casual labour, it will cover anybody who is offering a service to somebody else, even if it's just, you know, by verbal contract, essentially. And I would have never dared to ask for something as big as that. And actually, you know, my fight has always just been about putting the power into the hands of the victims when they negotiate a settlement. And the fact that the government is trying to really encase all of those vulnerable, particularly young people, actually, and, you know, who witness stuff, who don't have formal contracts, who may be work experience or interns, so are more likely to be fall foul of abuse, or those in low-income jobs. And so this is, you know, this is a huge thing.
Thank you very much. Zelda Perkins speaking there to me a little earlier. Now, I just wanted to bring you some breaking news that we just got coming through to us, because the German Foreign Minister has arrived in Israel for a 2-day trip that will also take him to the Israeli-occupied West Bank. And Germany, of course, traditionally has always been a very staunch ally of Israel, but of late has become more critical of their actions in Gaza. Well, he is now insisting that Israel must do more to increase aid supplies and also push for a ceasefire. And in the last few minutes, we're also hearing that Germany is now warning that Israel is, in their words, in danger of becoming isolated, and that they're trying to prevent that, and they want to see what they're describing as a fundamental improvement for the people of Gaza. So those details coming through to us in the last few minutes as Germany's foreign minister arrives in Israel tonight. Still to come on the Politics Hub. We could say that to really make it in politics these days, you've got to be a bit social media savvy, but we have noticed there's been a little trend of MP videos that, quite frankly, has to be addressed. Stay with us.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll have the latest from Leicestershire as a man is arrested over a suspected poisoning at a children's summer camp. Also ahead tonight, we'll speak to the Royal College of Nursing as it threatens to take strike action. And are food prices set to go up again? We'll be hearing how you could try and keep the costs down. All that and much more on the UK Tonight from 8.
Go ahead, back white jacket.
Deborah Haynes from Sky News. He called you Daddy earlier.
No, he did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy. Thank you.
Leicester is on its knees.
They've ripped the soul out of my factory and there's nothing left.
It is eerily quiet.
It's constantly on the brink of capacity.
There's overcrowding. It's not a new thing.
It's rough.
There's nothing to hide. Why aren't international journalists allowed in?
Are you worried about escalation?
Of course I'm worried about escalation, which is why my focus is on de-escalation.
The region, I think, is on edge because they are anticipating a retaliation.
Iran retaliates for the US attacks.
Founding principle of the alliance, that an attack on one is an attack on all.
Could Putin attack another NATO country within 5 years?
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country.
It's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, it's our final show, very sadly, before the summer recess. But before we go, there is something that's been happening in Westminster recently that we've just got to address. I want to talk to you about a new sensation in our politics that nobody is talking about. It's a change to the democratic bond between a Member of Parliament and the constituents that they serve. Politicians of all colours have become united in a belief. They can no longer stand still. They can no longer be fixed in one place because our politicians are on the move. They're moving forwards, putting one foot in front of the other, left and right, across the country, and they're stepping into the future. Through our streets, at ferry terminals, and with dogs, our MPs are near rivers, alongside our beautiful coastlines. They're even wearing sunglasses. They're searching for litter and finding primary schools. They're telling us about national policies and the defence of our nation. They're telling us about local issues, and they're mainly telling us about what they're doing when Parliament's not sitting. Well, acting a bit like TV presenters, actually, moving onto the turf of correspondents like me, who perfected over many years the art of walking and talking at the same time. Will it carry on? I don't know, but what I do know is that we are a great country and we're going to get through this. Right, I am absolutely knackered. Can we just get back to the studio? Come on.
I'd vote for that.
Sorry. They're everywhere, these walking videos we just had to do. I should credit Daryl at this point because it was Daryl's, my producer's excellent idea, but they're just all over the place. I mean, I have to say, Mick, I'm not sure how much walking you've done in your time. You tend to be a bit of a static communicator, is that fair?
I'm a static communicator. Look down the lens and tell them what's what.
That's old school, traditional.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're just trying to prove that they are human beings, I suppose, and they can walk. Was it Gerald Ford was accused of not being able to walk and sort of rhymes with tart, but at the same time. So they're trying to prove that they've got more than one bodily function that they can use.
I love it, I love it. I have to say to Hannah, though, you're a bit of an old pro at the old walking and talking.
I used to be. It's been a while. I'm a bit out of practice. No, I think
politician can walk
totally, both at the same time, and chew gum if I'm really trying.
We've got an example clip of you. I have to
you
say.
haven't.
Yeah. Here we go.
Gets run out is the first private member and so on and so forth. So you want to get in early to try and get a good number or a number that you is a lucky number, and I will keep you posted. So all done. I got in nice and early and managed to get the number 22, which I'm happy about. It's a lucky number for me because it was my dad's birthday, but also I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, and of course she has a great song, 22. So now we wait. The ballot will be drawn on Thursday. Hopefully that number 22 comes out and I do secure a slot for a private members bill. But if I do, what bill should I introduce? Drop your suggestions in the comments below.
That was such a brazen example of engagement farming, wasn't it? It was really bad.
I love it.
I think for me, I was always keen to try and communicate with people where they actually consume their news, because I could write an article in the local papers and a demographic will see that. But actually a lot of people, and particularly younger people, I mean, I was elected at 26, a lot of younger people get most of their media from social media these days. And so during the general election, I decided to just kind of vlog my journey a bit. So it'd be like, we've just got this huge box of leaflets, and I get my selfie video of me talking about that, and then we're in this pub, come and speak to us, and it just became a bit of a habit.
But
people loved it.
When was this? This was a few years ago. Robert Jenrick's on your turf.
I know.
He's nicking all your ideas.
It's all right.
You did it
I'll let people nick a good idea as long as they execute it well, and it's been a bit touch and go from some of them whether it is executed.
So who's got the most followings out of that? Is it Jenrick or is it?
I don't actually know. I don't know. But I'll be honest, he's done pretty well.
He's done really well.
He's got
His
millions,
new haircut.
a lot of views. The new haircut.
Going out without a tie.
Yeah.
Every now and again.
Shocking. I think it's really important, though, and especially, as I say, more and more people are on social media. I'm putting in hours a day scrolling through TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, like whatever it might be. You have to be there putting out your messaging because if not, there is a vacuum to be filled, and there's a reason that parties like Reform are doing really, really well. They are there on social media, not afraid to embrace it, talk to people, engage, and I think the Conservatives were playing catch up a little bit, but I've been a lot more impressed with the recent social media output.
Do you think there's a bit of kind of central control on it? Because there's a lot of Conservative videos, aren't there?
Yeah, there's quite a theme in terms of layouts, subtitles. One couldn't possibly suggest there might be a third-party agency that's helping support on such matters. But
interesting.
I would not be surprised if that were the case. But actually, a lot of newer MPs who don't actually have government or party roles are just doing a lot off their own bat with selfie videos, talking about what they're up to. And I also think demystifying the role of an MP, talking about what it's really like to be in that debate, how this process works, what do I get up to when Parliament isn't sitting, am I just being lazy on holiday? No, I'm not. Here's my list. It's really important, and I think a lot of people out there actually quite like it.
Walking picket line, what do you reckon?
Well, we did a bit. We had a whole documentary by the BBC, a 2-hour output, and they loved us walking.
Yeah.
Everything was walking to and from various meetings, and it was an interesting experience.
And I should say, I'm not taking the mickey here because we're terrible at it in TV. We're always walking to nowhere, like always.
Well, the BBC a few years ago had every single person walking towards the camera for about 5 years. I thought,
that's why I'm not happy about it. Nicking all our tricks.
But also, you forget how to walk. When you're being filmed walking, you're suddenly very aware of your arms and your legs and your hips and your shoulders. And it's very unnatural.
I was doing that in the video as well. Kept forgetting how to do it. That is it from us tonight, and also for the summer, but we will be back in September. Up next, it's the UK Tonight with Sarah Jane Me, but we're going to have a little break. Thank you so much for joining us on the Politics Hub for this season, if you like. It's been really great to have your company.